Yay, welcome y'all. I have a question embedded in the presentation that I already had planned, so maybe that can work out in a few moments. I also want to honor that if Lean had something for the inclusive welcome, super happy to jam on that too. I do know that there are a few key people that are still missing. Do we want to hang out until they get on here? What you feeling? So right now I only see that there's 6 of us. Is that true?
No.
We have 25 people.
Turn on your non-video participants, yo.
Non-video participants.
Non-video participants are people too.
What's my technology doing?
Or are they?
We welcome all non-video participants.
Most
That sounds like
definitely.
some shit you would say, Lean.
As far as my tech
We
options.
might be robots. You never know.
Disembodied voices. Oh, yeah.
On the talk about embodiment, the irony. Let's see, I'm trying to see where I can see.
I will make you a host
go.
so that you can share your screen.
Yeah.
And the only thing is that you need to accept the people into the call.
If you make me a co-host, I can help.
I don't know how
Thank
to
you,
do
Jeremy.
how to do that of making a co-host.
If you look on
Go
the
up to
participants
participant.
list and click on more. You can tell who lives in Zoom, right?
But it says make host. It doesn't have the co-host option.
Well, if you want to make me host, I can make Jeremy co-host.
Yeah, I will make you host. Perfect. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you all for your
We are still
presence
admitting
as we are negotiating. Yeah, I don't have the co-host option either. Jeremy, you want me to make you host?
No.
Oh, hell no. I do not consent. Okay. Well, I will aim to do the best that I can in regards to admitting folks as they arrive. So welcome everybody. So wonderful to get to see you today. Good morning, good evening, etc., wherever you might be. Something that I'm hoping that we might be able to offer each other is an opportunity to both share a little bit more about ourselves in the way that we name each other in Zoom or name ourselves in Zoom, as well as in the chat. So if we can take a few moments, so please, if you don't already have it, to put the name that you would like to be addressed as in this conversation today in the name on your Zoom profile, in addition to the pronoun or pronouns that you use, so that as we're in conversation, we can be inclusive of our gender identity to the best that we can through the limitation of language. So to be able to do that, go up to participants, find yourself, should be a little bit button next to it to be able to rename yourself. And if you've already got that going on, then you can support the team by continuing to ground in your breath. Take some breaths to welcome yourself here. Alrighty, cool. People are still showing up. Welcome, y'all. Alrighty,
guys.
and so once you get the opportunity to put your name and your pronouns in your Zoom name, please also take a moment to share in the chat if you feel like you got the spoons for it or the energy for it, is to share something that you can feel in your body. It can be a muscular sensation, any other state that you notice, ways that your joints might be feeling, as well as where you're connecting from on this planet. And so as you all are taking some time to type that in so that we know both how we're showing up and where we're coming in from, I'll be able to share that with you all too. My name is Morgan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm connecting with you all from Puyallup land, which is called Tacoma, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And something that I am feeling in my body is adrenaline pumping in my shoulders for the excitement that I have to be here with you all today. Alrighty, let's see what we got going on in the chat here. Welcome to everybody who's arriving. So happy to have you. All right, I'll be taking a look out for where y'all are from. Thank you for your willingness to be able to share with each other. If you haven't looked in already, take a look at the chat for folks sharing how their body's feeling today and where they are connected from. We can start to kind of develop that global map that we got going on. And I love to see the movement that is already happening. This is excellent. All right, y'all. So a little bit of a grounding exercise to gather with one another. Wanted to invite you all to 5 collective breaths. You're welcome to do that with your eyes open, eyes closed. Also, you're welcome to shift your body at any point during this practice as we're talking together today. So as you practice starting to notice what it feels like to breathe, maybe taking a breath to check out your environment. Notice exits, entrances, places you're receiving light from. You're welcome to trace your eyes around if you like, check it out. Also then maybe taking a breath to recognize the ancestors that you represent in your body as you gather here. A big old breath for them. You're also welcome to take a breath to honor the supports that you have, the supports that are able to be rocking it so that you can show up today. Also taking a breath to notice your muscles. Are there any muscles that need to move? Are there any muscles that need a little bit of touch, a wiggle, a stretch? And maybe one last breath for anything that you want to assign it for. A breath for something I have yet to mention. Alrighty, so I want to start by saying that any information that I am sharing today is shared explicitly in efforts for us to collectively share or collectively create connected, healthy, robust, and resilient relationships with our bodies so that we can navigate uprooting and disentangling ourselves from any patterns of violence, not limited to, but including white-bodied supremacy, colonialism, extractive economics, ableism, heteronormativity, cisnormativity, binary thinking of any sort, religious oppression, and many others that I might not have space and time to name. And that we can have more nutritive information to be able to create opportunities for interconnected, sustainable, and for collaboration for our mutual co-liberation. So you're welcome to take a couple breaths and like, let that land. There's a little shake, if there's a resonance to it. I'm noticing that in regards to me being able to participate well with you all today, I'm not really able to co-monitor the chat on my iPad as well as I can on my laptop. So if there's anything that pops up in the chat, can I have a few chat helpers kind of keep an eye on that with me? If there's a question that feels like it's pertinent and timely to interrupt the conversation, I want to make sure that folks have access that way. I see a nod from Jeremy. Jeremy, do you mind being that person? One of them. Is there another teammate that can help out? Chat monitor. One? Okay. Dale. So to decrease the stranger danger, I'll introduce myself a little bit and then we'll go into the content. So my name is Morgan. I am a queer, neurodivergent, genderqueer person living on Puyallup land like I shared as a settler. And I am a constant learner and unlearner that wants to offer deep respects to any of the teachers that I've shared space with along the way, particularly any of the queer, trans, Black, and Indigenous youth, peers, and elders that have shared their time and their willingness to co-teach with me. I've pretty much spent my life trying to figure out and study the impacts of and the opportunities for restoration from relational and systemic violence. Body and earth-based science are my jam, my passion, and I aim to take deep responsibility for wiring myself for the behavioral patterns that allow for me to practice co-liberating relationships with my body and the living bodies around me. And professionally, I've been of service as a social worker, choreographer, movement facilitator, community connector, complex trauma specialist for a few decades now, mostly on the West Coast of the United States, Latin America and Caribbean, and on international collaborative teams. And I hope that this conversation is a sweet opportunity for seed planting for ongoing conversations about anything that we bring up, and that we could be in constant learning with each other. And I am in deep, deep, deep gratitude to be sharing space with you all. Hi, cool. So let's see here. So, Jeremy, is there anything in the chat that I need to know? So far, so good.
Folks are here and expressing a lot of gratitude for good vibes.
Excellent, awesome. Make sure that I have admitted everybody. Coolio. So I want to share some opening thoughts and kind of like context planting for us to be able to plant the kind of roots that are required for the relationships that we want to co-build with one another. We got to kind of like till some soil. And so these thoughts are for that. So every time that we gather with each other, we bring our whole selves, our lived history, our ancestry, our cultural, our lived experience. And today, I want to make sure that you know what words I'm using to describe that. I'll call that our lived survivorship, or the wisdom of our survivorship, or the density of our survivorship. I want to make sure that in this conversation, anytime we bring up trauma or oppression or systems of violence or the potentiality of harm, our body's going to like activate that just by thinking about it. We're all going to have our own points of reference for that. And since that is viscerally activating, I want to invite you all to a moment of consideration of what methods of self-care you have access to during this call, and ones that you want to plan for when you get off. So that could be making sure you got some water with you. If you got something like nature bound that you can hold on to, maybe a rock or some wood. And please recognize that in this space, we won't necessarily have time to be able to like expand on details of our own lived history, but if something pops up for you, that means it's worth paying attention to. So write it down and make sure you plan for an opportunity to be able to revisit that and give it honor when you do have space and time to be able to tend to it. And as we gather today, make sure that you are giving yourself opportunities to move, to wiggle, to stretch, to be able to honor what does come up in your body. So a baseline fact that I want to make as, kind of a consideration as we're talking today is that all of us are an interesting combination of survivor of and participants in systems of oppression. We are not separate from. And so each of us have certain aspects of our identities and cultural positionalities that are either more or less protected amidst systems of oppression. And so for those of us that might have a higher density of identities that are unprotected within systems of harm, I want to lay out the foundation that that is a sign of having a higher level of survivorship wisdom and badassery. So let that sink in with a breath or so. And in this space, we want to make sure that that density of survivorship and that wisdom and that badassery is deeply respected. Of equal measure, any of the positionality or cultural identities that you hold that are more protected within systems of oppression, there's a higher likelihood that you might unknowingly participate in causing harm. Just out of just not knowing, because you've been so protected. And in that, we want to make sure that in this environment, we're also holding ourselves responsible for being mindful about tuning in to that potentiality. And then I also want to name that by virtue of us all speaking English with one another, and English being the dominant language in this space, we are participating in a really tricky and violent history of colonialism while we're trying to use this code and language to be able to create opportunities for care and connection and liberation and possibilities to work together. So I just want to name that there's a lot of complexity in trying to use English as a tool because of its history and because of the ways that our tongues, our throats, and our bodies have learned to speak it. So those are some opening thoughts, y'all, before we dive into some body facts. So I want to get curious with each other about some of the hardwired stuff in our body that need our attention and that we cannot bypass when we're aiming to create trauma-sensitive and anti-oppressive space with one another. The first being that your body is made up of 75% water, and you live on a planet that is made up of 75% water. In that, we are very permeable beings. Our thoughts and the energy around us impact how our water molecules form with one another. And our relationship with hydration is one of the places that we can deeply invest in a trauma-sensitive relationship with ourselves to make sure that we are thoroughly hydrated as best as we can. Team hydrate, yes. As well as getting curious and noticing what your relationship with your water and your environment is, where you source your water, the health of it, how much you contact it, and how much you're in relationship with it. So particularly as we take on the work that we're up to, I want to offer a reflection moment for you to consider in this moment, as I'm jamming right now, what's my relationship with hydration? What kind of curiosity can I offer to it? And how might I participate in it? And with that said, take a drink. Cheers, y'all. Some other body facts that I want to bring into this conversation is an interesting percentage as well about our bodies is in regards to the signal conduction within our body and also how we signal with each other from body to body. So in our body, the systems that allow us to notice if we are well or unwell, safe or unsafe, or in need of something, conduct afferently, meaning body to brain. About 85% of all of those signals come from our body. That means that the foundation of our thoughts, our perception, our brain capacity, and access to how we use our brain primarily come from body sensations like heartbeat, gut pulse, circulation, breath rate, all that jazz. And so our body's capacity for, or our capacity to pick up on our body's signals is going to give us 85% of our sensation of being connected to self, connected to others, present. And so how we move, how we breathe, and what we put in our bodies are the first layer of how we can create a trauma-sensitive relationship with ourselves and with others. Happy to do a deep dive on your polyvagal system, which is what I'm citing when I'm talking about that 85% body-brain conduction. That can be a later talk, seed plant. The other consideration in regards to our bodies, that's another 85% number. My neurodivergence loves numbers and patterns. Is that 85% of our communication is nonverbal. I'm going to say that again, 85% of our communication is nonverbal. So here we are in Web3, rocking words flying across the universe, like trying to type out stuff that's super hella complex. And we're depending on the 15% to be able to navigate with one another, where there's this like 85% that is so key for us to be able to notice if there's resonance, connection, capacity for collaboration. That all comes from our heart rate, our breath rate, our facial expression, our tone, our movements, our gestures, our physical proximity. So in communities like Gravity, an invitation here for trauma sensitivity is to consider how can we cultivate opportunities to be able to use that 85% of nonverbal communication to be able to collaborate with one another. And if the 15%, that verbal stuff, gets in the way, then there's probably another 85% of discovery and curiosity that we may have missed when we're receiving messages from one another. There's another interesting fact about our bodies electrically. From our heart, we emit an 8-foot radius sphere around us of an electrical field all the time. Every single body, every time our heart beats and that we breathe, we emit 8 feet forward, back, up, down, all around us of a pulse. Our bodies are used to being close enough with one another so that pulse interacts. And then we get ideas about how to be in relationship with one another and how to be able to co-feel with one another. Now we're aiming to do something that's incredibly challenging to not have access to that electrical pulse because we're doing this screen thing. In that, it can be really helpful to consider imagining what it would be like to actually be within that 8-foot radius of one another. What could it feel like to sense each other's heart rates? Because we're meant to co-signal with each other so that we can be in effective collaboration. Now, all of this stuff, your body's signaling to your brain and our body's signaling to one another. One of the main places that we have access to be able to work that stuff, give it fuel, use it effectively, is through the way that we breathe. That is our mechanical and muscular access point to be able to be in presence with our own body and in presence with the bodies around us. So that means the rhythm of it, the movement of it, which muscles you use for it. And our breath is meant to be able to help us meet the present moment. That means our breath can help us feel our passion, our excitement, our capacity to rev up and get into something, to be able to bring us to ground, to center, to calm, and everything in between. And so I want to take a little bit of time to do an activity around our breath. I'm also going to do a time check. Sweet. Ooh, don't fall clock. So on anything that you have to write down, text it to yourself, write it down or whatever, maybe taking a moment or two to kind of notice what parts of your breath you're able to feel as it is right now. Breathing in and out of your nose, what parts of your torso might be moving as you're breathing, the rhythm of it. And sometimes we don't feel our breath either. Take a little note. And then I want to offer you some like downloads about your breath. We have 5 muscle groups that we use to help ourselves breathe. First muscle group is kind of like this collar that we got from like our sternal-masculoids, these guys along our neck and our upper shoulders. That's group number 1. Group number 2 is our pectoral muscles, so our upper chest. Group number 3 is our intercostal muscles. They run between every single one of our ribs from our collarbones down to the bottom for like almost kind of like 360 expansion. Next group, because it's a big old muscle, is your diaphragm. It runs along the bottom of your rib cage, moves up and down like a parachute for every breath. And then you have a web, I'll back up a little bit, of your abdominal muscles that both run internally and externally around the kind of bottom part of your torso. And all 5 of those groups are involved in your breath. Often we get kind of habitually patterned to breathe with only certain muscles and underuse others. And all 5 of those groups are necessary for us to be able to kind of access the kind of breath that we need to create sustainable, connected relationships with each other to counteract falling into patterns of our survival responses that can cause harm. So this activity is to take a little bit of time to kind of like work through each of those muscle groups and notice how they're working. So in your own way, eyes open, eyes closed, however you want to rock it, beginning with a breath to notice which of those muscle groups you notice first. Pectoral muscles, intercostals, diaphragm you'll notice at the bottom of your ribs, abdominal muscles. And then maybe offer yourself a moment or two to be able to take 5 breaths in sequence, starting from the top and moving group by group. Just kind of experiment with noticing what it feels like to move them on purpose. Maybe 1 or 2 more breaths, depending on how you're pacing yourself right now. And maybe taking a note or two, either for yourself or publicly in the chat if you would like to, as to any kind of like curious things that you noticed. Any shifts that happened in your state or your perception as you practice breathing. And if anybody wants to share verbally, please feel free. I heard a voice. Got breath that starts from the bottom up.
I can come in.
Ooh.
Yeah, I feel like my posture changes. My body naturally moves into a posture where it allows those groups, muscle groups, to have more oxygen. I also noticed that to have like a louder exhale and use my voice as I am exhaling is very helpful to relax those muscle groups. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicola. Are there any shares in the chat that I may have missed? What's going on? A little reflection on what Justin shared is that using our muscles effectively takes practice. So they were commenting about, or he was commenting about his practices of meditation, and through those practices ended up being able to access using abdominal muscles for support in their breath. So sometimes, depending on how much violence we've experienced or trauma we've experienced, there are certain breath muscles that we have like not practiced accessing because our body has gone into a survival response to keep us alive. And as we practice accessing muscles that we haven't in the past, a little caveat is that sometimes that feels really fucking awkward. Sometimes it feels really painful. Sometimes it feels almost impossible. So please practice accessing your breath muscles in a way where you get to consent to it. There's no force, there's no right way to breathe. We're accessing these 5 breath muscle groups, kind of like 5 musicians trying to play the song that's going to best meet our moment. Sometimes we need to be able to practice breathing a breath that allows us to experience rage, that allows us to experience inspiration, that allows us to experience passion, to allow us to feel our like bigness. So all of these muscles get to move in an interconnected way to be able to support you in what you're up to. Alrighty, I'm noticing I need a little bit of fresh air. Just a little reminder, tend to your body, please move, please stretch. Grab some water if you need. All right, so we're moving from our 5 breath muscle groups to our 5 survival responses. Tuning in again to like the things that are automatically happening in our body to keep us alive, to keep us in the game. So our 5 survival responses are fight, flight, freeze, submit, fawn, or appease. This is kind of this like 5th, 6th one that, you know, researchers talk about a little bit differently depending on how they're rocking it. I'll review them again, but something to consider is that our bodies automatically choose our survival responses based off of what our ancestors have used to keep us alive and in the game, as well as the survival responses that have worked for us to be able to continue like existing and continuing staying alive. So our bodies choose it based off of the environment, based off of our own positionality. This is a subconscious choice that we're equipped with to be able to keep ourselves alive. And they happen on low volume and high volume anytime. I'll definitely repeat them. You'll hear them over and over and over again. They happen on automatic and they happen on any volume. Anytime our body has a sense of being under threat, whether an idea of ours is under threat, an aspect of our identity is under threat, or being questioned. And so again, fight, flight, freeze, submit, fawn, or appease. This happens through our language, this happens through our posture, this happens through every single element of us. And so fight might be like I automatically defend myself. My volume gets higher, my body gets bigger. Flight is any form of avoidance. I get the fuck out of there. I get the fuck out of a conversation. I stop thinking about that thing. I avoid it. Freeze is you lock up. It can be a full body lockup. It can be your mouth locks up, your mind locks up. Keeps you in a pause just to see if like you're gonna be okay. Submit and fawn and appease are ones that we talk about less. And these are ones that we need to be really, really, really mindful of because they're a little bit harder to notice. Fight and flight, much easier to notice because they like lead you to do something. Your freeze, submit, fawn, or appease. How's my internet connection, y'all? Is it coming through okay? I'm noticing a little bit of like stickiness. All good? Okay. So freeze, submit, and fawn are ones that we may not notice that somebody's in a survival response because freeze means they're just chilling, they're hanging out and being still. They're like, well, you didn't say anything, so you must have not wanted to. Submit is where we like go along to get along with the powers that be. We'll follow. We'll just be like, okay, it's easier to just get fucking through this than to resist. And typically these last 3 are ones that the bodies that have experienced a higher density of harm, we tend to rock these last 3. So being mindful of the subtleties of these, both in your own body and for people on teams that you're working with, is incredibly, incredibly important. So we've got freeze, holding still, submit, going along to get along. Fawn and appease are this interesting dance where we will play and act like the powers that be to get along with them. We'll start to notice that we're gonna like say shit that we didn't really mean because this is gonna like agree with the powers that be. And appease is that we kind of like appease to the powers that be. We might just like start complimenting them and stuff and like hoisting them up a little bit or appeasing to their perspectives. And these are ones that we need to be really, 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 really mindful of on teams. And this comes into the play when we talk about consent, making sure that when we get to say yes, we're actually saying yes. When we know, we get to say no, etc. And each of these have a muscular pattern. Each of these have sensations that go along with them, body temperature, phrases. And so collectively, it's worthwhile for us to continue to start to notice, what do my survival responses feel like? What do they sound like? How do they show up? I'm going to take time on teams to notice if they're showing up on your teams, because they are all the time. And we're so used to being in these survival responses because we've had to do them that we haven't practiced questioning them. And so it's really, really, really important that we start to notice them, name them, and be able to pattern our bodies for alternate options. All right. Dun, 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 dun. Anything in the chat that I should notice? How we doing?
There are some really interesting observations on breath.
Mhm.
I don't want to put anybody on blast, but if there's space to share out, I would encourage you.
Also, Lynn was asking to list the words, the keywords.
Let me write them down.
Fly, flee, freeze, submit, on, and appease. Are those ones?
We got nifty graphic options. Yes.
Also, I just want to update on the POAP thing. I already sent a request. So if we don't have the word able for this hour, we will drop them by DM. So just to let you know that either way you will receive the POAP. If we can send it before the end of this call, it's good. If not, check your DMs. Just that.
I was coordinating with Aloysius for this special word to be survivorship. Did that get worked out, or did it get missed along the way somewhere?
No, the word is good. The thing is that they are very narrow on the claiming time, and yeah, they sent us an email to clarify some things. I already replied the email, but I am waiting for the response.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for navigating that. Super appreciate. Alrighty. Cool. Yeah. So the title of this topic was trauma sensitive and anti-oppressive culture. So now that we have like that body base laid out of the ways that our bodies work, accessibility that we have in regards to how we breathe, to be able to notice if we're in our survival responses, and also to bring ourselves out of them and into connection and presence with one another, I wanted to lay out some like characteristics that those skills help us build with one another. So some ideas that I've kind of collected in being in community with other folks that are focusing on this work is that we kind of have to come up with an understanding of like what is trauma, and that we could go into so many details about that, but I want to give some like general descriptions around like ways we can be paying attention for it. And then also give some opportunities for us to describe what we're working towards, because our bodies really need to know what our positive opposite is, or the alternative behavior set, in addition to knowing what we shouldn't be doing. So trauma has a higher likelihood to happen in situations where too much is happening too fast. I'm gonna say that again. Has a higher likelihood of happening when too much is happening too fast. Because when it's too fast, too much, our bodies cannot process. Our nervous systems can only take on so much stimulation at such speed. Another context in which trauma has a higher likelihood of happening is when we have too little for too long. So a small amount of resources for too long of a time. And so that can be kind of like an easy check-in. Is too much happening too fast? Or have we not allotted enough resources for too long? And in either of those contexts, there's a high likelihood of causing harm. Questions as well to discern whether trauma has a higher likelihood of happening is if we are not paying attention to how we are practicing being protective or offering protection for and validation of the density of survivorship on our team or any group that we're working with. So really taking our time to be able to notice, am I making sure that I'm taking protective efforts to notice if any sort of system of harm is interacting on our team? Are we slowing down enough to notice if any patriarchal patterns are happening, if any racist patterns are happening, if any extractive patterns of economics are happening? so that we can make sure that we're taking protective efforts to not be behaving in those ways. So what's required for values to be able to make sure that we're operating in a trauma-sensitive way is making sure that we're centering the badassery of survivorships on all of our teams and in ourselves. First and foremost, we got to be able to validate our own badassery of survivorship and the wisdom that we have. What's required for that is for us to be willing to co-feel the lived realities of our body and the bodies on our team. That means you got to be able to be willing to feel sensations that your body might not have felt because it's just never lived in another skin sack on this planet. And be able to be willing to go, oh, that's a sensation I've never felt before. I'm going to make sure I can stay present to it. I'm not going to invalidate it. I'm not going to shut it off. I'm going to try to stay as connected as fucking possible. And also, this is an interesting part as it plays into consent, is that the boundaries and expectations that we have on our team is ones that we say what we mean and we mean what we say. They're predictable enough, we follow through with them, and they're flexible to be able to adapt to the present moment. Somebody who does a lot of work around beautiful boundary construction is Prentice Hemphill. I'll write their name in the chat before I go for sure. And they define a boundary as a boundary is something that allows me to have enough distance to both love myself and love you at the same time, aka take care of myself and take care of you at the same time. Not just take care of you, not just take care of the team, but I gotta be able to take care of myself first. And at that point, we can have reciprocity in trauma-sensitive relationships. We also need to be able to be aware of intersectional and global historical relationships as they play out on our teams. And be able to be explicitly willing to question any kind of behavior that might be replicating patterns of harm. And more often than not, we're doing it unintentionally. But at least to be able to name what those patterns might be and be like, yo, what's going on? Also, on any trauma-sensitive team, we get to be able to participate in an embodied way where our body can show up and other folks' bodies can show up. Admitting more people. We practice sharing power on trauma-sensitive teams and groups by slowing down and offer enough breath and space into the tightness of complexity. Rushing through it means that we're probably going to be in a trauma response because we remember too much too fast. And we ask, like, how am I purposely connecting with my team, and are we moving at a sustainable rhythm? So lastly, want to make sure that we're focusing on the concept of consent. To be able to consent to an experience, a work project, a relationship, a conversation, we can only move from a place of consent, being able to say an authentic yes to it or an authentic no to not participating if we're present in our bodies. So an invitation ongoing to you all is, as you're moving through your life, to give yourself some opportunities to be able to pay attention to what sensations in your body give you an understanding that something is a yes for you. And also equally of importance, what sensations in your body give you a maybe? I'm gonna think about that for a while. Possibly, I don't know yet. Also, what are sensations in your body that are like, no, not now, and maybe not ever. So let's see here. Ooh, got some cool bird sounds. That's fun.
I just want to say that the POAP is ready and the secret word is survivorship. So I think you all should be able to claim that.
Awesome. Okay. I think I'm at the end of any of the download of content that I wanted to share with you all. I definitely look forward to continuing to collaborate with you all on creating videos about the stuff that we talked about, to create graphics about the stuff that I got an opportunity to talk about. I want this to be as collaborative of a process as possible. Some questions I want to leave you with is, what is something that you want to remember about from their conversation today? To remember about your body. what are some things that you want to remember about trauma sensitivity? And what are some things that you want to remember about consent? And with that, I want to open it up to conversations, curiosities, questions, feedback, and thank you so much to each and every one of you that showed up this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whatever part of the planet you're on. And I hope to be in continued connection with you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So if you need a kickoff spot to share, you're welcome to share any of the things that I offered questions around that you want to remember about your body, trauma sensitivity, or consent. Or if there's something that's like, Morgan, that didn't fucking make sense. I have a question. Lay it on me.
I have a question.
Is that a Durgadesh?
Hi.
Hey.
So if you've habituated to this, right, this right here, this seated life, right? So this, and maybe you've also situated yourself in a weird relationship, and there's just a number of different things. Oh, there's a rock. Then the question is what's the process for giving yourself permission to sort of exit that, or to you know, parse it out so that you can be like, figure out what the right response is? Do you see what I'm saying? Because a lot of times we're just like, you know, we're bound up in all these things, but then there's a person in your life and you blame them for it. Do you know what I mean? So so there's a bunch of things that might have happened that you're lumping all together. And so for me, it's important to be able to parse out and say, this was, you know, inherited from my family, and this is inherited from the culture. This is the thing I chose to do out of agency and autonomy. This is, you know, or do I continue thinking that my agency and autonomy should go after, you know, a broken thing? Do you know what I mean? So how does one sort of figure out how to parse those things, right? Because for me, I feel like I've got to slow everything down, and I need a lot more time, you know, being on the spectrum and everything, right? Because I've got a lot more to process than a lot of people are aware, right? So here we are having a shared experience, but my process is extremely different because I've, you know, everything's pushing on me. So I really feel often that I have to go very slow, even though to other people I might seem like I'm going fast. So yeah, it's a weird thing to slow yourself down sort of consciously. And I feel like there's a speed component to that trauma too. Like people are forcing me all the time to be fast, whereas I want to be really slow. But so I've adapted to the fact that I have to be fast all the time. But then,
I got you.
So like, you know, so like that's what I'm saying is just the parsing part is the thing, because I, you know, have so much coming on. So any clue you can give me about parsing, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to name for myself and for everybody the order that I'm going to like address hands. So we've got the question at hand, gonna rock Contessa, Aloysius, and then Shanzi. Those are the hands that I see. And so a little bit for folks who are autistic like myself or experience a plentitude of attention that our world likes to call it ADHD. We're processing up to 60% more stimuli throughout the day. So that too much, too fast thing, 100% real. And in that, we have a series of choices. So what we're practicing in any of this is aiming to find new patterns that are more sustainable. So of all of the things that you talked about, Durgadesh, at one access point you have is like, how might I choose to breathe differently throughout the day? I typically breathe like this. What might it be like to choose a little bit of a different breath when I am approaching something? How might that just be enough of a shift to start to perceive things a little differently? And then from there, you might notice like, another change might be that I need more breaks. What do I need to do to offer myself more breaks so that I'm not constantly in this grind? And then I can see apertures for opportunities to choose something different. And from there, we keep on engaging choice after choice after choice, recognizing that anytime that we bring on novelty, our body's going to try to be like, woo, cognitive dissonance. I don't like this new thing. And we get to like nurture ourselves, being like, you're safe enough. You can try that out, work on it. And I'm super down to have ongoing conversations with you too, because I want to make sure I get to other folks that have their hands raised. Contessa, what you got?
So I'm thinking and I'm processing about what you said earlier about how our bodies are 85% water and our relationship with water and hydration. And I'm always dehydrated, always. Even me trying to go get apps to drink more water, I buy water, I have filters, I have all these plans to drink more water, and I just don't. And sitting in this conversation and thinking about the trauma that I've experienced, that my family's experienced, that my ancestors experienced, and wondering what their relationship with water is and if I'm carrying that along with me. And that's maybe why I kind of freeze when it comes to drinking water. Like, this has been a really big issue with me. And I've never really thought about it till I came to this conversation today right here. And so it's definitely going to give me a lot to think about and process, but I do feel like that this may be a starting point on the way of healing. Thank you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm like literally exploding with joy. Oh my gosh. That is so gorgeous. Oh, so gorgeous. Yeah, a reminder that anytime we have maybe, like you're saying, that you've not had enough water in your body, and we might have not had enough of a lot of things, safety, security, touch, food, etc. So anytime we start to approach a resource that we haven't been in consistent relationship with, our body's going to be like, are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want to do? Are you sure? And so that moment is where we get to like really nurture our relationship with, when we have a trauma response, how do we go like, I hear you, I feel you, maybe let's try something a tiny bit different. I can see the benefit of this thing I want to lean into, but every time we make one of those choices, we bring up all of the grief of the times that we didn't have touch, water, nourishment, safety, etc. So go at this pace that you can metabolize that grief as you're like re-engaging with the possibility of hydrating in a way that you go like, I'm drinking this one for you, ancestors, let's take it back, let's go. Like, all right, and want to, again, totally down to be in ongoing conversations, please reach out to me. Aloe, what you got? Aloysius. Oop, your sound's a little funky. Do you still want to raise your hand?
Can you hear me?
Yay, now we can.
Shanzi raised their hand before me.
Okay. Oh, thank you for catching that. Okay, Shanzi, Aloe, and then Wanka.
Awesome, thank you, I appreciate that. No, yeah, so it's been a super interesting conversation. I think that, I don't know, I've got a lot to say about it, but one thing that really is sticking out in my mind is whenever we're talking about trauma, and I think it's important that we like recognize the things that happen to us, but I think that it's also equally important, if not more important, that we recognize them only to let them go. Because I feel like if we make it a habit to take on this trauma and identify with it, then we become that trauma, and you can never escape that because you're trying to escape something that you made to be yourself. And I feel like if you can let it go, the trauma, then you start discovering these deeper parts of yourself that are beyond words. So all these things like race, sexual orientation, where you're from, what you like, all of those things become topping on the cake. And the cake is you, right? Like you are the bread and everything else is just like this icing that's on it. And whenever you come in contact with that part of yourself that's beyond trauma, beyond identification, it immediately affects the way that you treat every single other person that is a part of your experience. And I think that one thing is the basis of what we are trying to do here, which is, you know, conflict resolution. But I think at its basis is treating every single other person the way you would like to be treated. And I feel like once you can see yourself below all of these things that we use to identify ourselves, then you also see other people below all that too, which is just consciousness, which is just the building blocks of everything. And yeah, I don't know. I just really felt the need to share that here, and I really hope that resonated with at least somebody. And yeah, that's it.
I appreciate you sharing for that. And I think in aiming to be able to connect with each other safely enough that we're not over depending upon our trauma responses, we do need to be mindful of the systems that are already in place that we haven't eradicated yet. And so we're only really able to do that kind of connection that you're describing when we're safe enough to do so. So we do get to get to create safe enough environments where that kind of connection can be possible. So we don't want to like bypass the work that's necessary to uproot the systems that make it that we continually get activated in relationships with one another.
I get what you're saying, although I feel like it's a lot easier than what we make it out to be, right? Because they say as soon as you shine light on your shadow, it's no longer your shadow, right? So as soon as you view it, as long as you don't hold on to it and say like, I need to get over this thing, then you immediately view it and you view it as being something other than yourself. So you have no choice but to move on from it because you recognize that that is not you, right? And I think that's super important. And I think that it's just important part of just your own development. And like I said, if you're acting from this basis, then everything that you do will be taken for exactly what you mean it to be. I don't know. But although I do have to jump, guys, I really hate to cut this conversation short because it's really interesting, but I have another meeting to get to. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and thanks, Morgan. For me also, I learned a lot today because when I thought of trauma, I only thought related to the experience that I lived in my life. But here we've talked a lot about collective trauma and the trauma that we inherit within our body system. So I really stay with that our communication in most part is nonverbal, and that just sometimes smiling to someone can break the ice and overcome some of that trauma barriers that we all face, because just smiling to the other shows the empathy that you can connect with the trauma of the other person, recognizing that you also have trauma. And I see trauma as a bag, as an invisible bag that we all carry, and it is as heavy and as big as we would want it to be, or as we feel comfortable with it. So yeah, I also would like to say that it's something that we have experienced in one way or another, and sometimes we think that people who have experienced more trauma sometimes is people in a minority, but also people who have been very privileged, they also have their trauma. So sometimes we tend to close and to say what is trauma and what is not, but at the same time, as if we see it as something that we have within our heritage just for being human, we can understand that, yeah, that we are all somehow affected and molded by the systems that we live in.
Yeah, very much so. Aloe, I realized that I lost your hand in the offering feedback, but I know you're participating in the chat. I didn't know if you want to put words to it.
I don't think I have the best service. I wrote something in the chat.
So far, I'm hearing you okay. I wanted to try. A little nugget that I'm thinking of from the last two points of feedback from Sean and from Juan. If you all are interested particularly in the collective impacts of particularly white-bodied supremacy and colonialism, a really awesome author to pay attention to is Resmaa Menakem and their book, My Grandmother's Hands. And so something, and Nicola, I see you, something to consider is that a quote from him, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is that oftentimes our transgenerational trauma and our lived experience in this particular flesh stack trauma becomes so hardwired that we identify with it as personality. Simultaneously, collective trauma responses, like the flight and avoidance response of most white folks to racism, or the disassociation from, or the submitting to the values that perpetuate white-bodied supremacy and racism, also become cultural values and become culture. And so we are so well suited to survive the systems of violence that have been around for generations and generations and generations, is that a lot of times we don't got eyes on them. We don't necessarily feel them, and we assume them to be either personality or culture. So an invitation there is to consider, like, in my community where I'm at, what are the like cultural values that keep those patterns in place? That also means there's, you know, investment in taking a study as to what are the different patterns of violence that my space that I've grown up in or share community in continue to replicate. And a reminder that the more protected you are, AKA if you're white, if you're cisgendered, particularly if you're male identifying, if you're well educated, if you've participated in a dominant religion around you, those are folks that have been able to move through the world through being able to bypass the impacts of violence more easily. And so we need to be really mindful around suggesting anything that bypasses and doesn't pay attention to the like real visceral lived experience of violence that continues to happen for those of us that are less protected by those systems of violence. So I also want to honor that we're 5 minutes past. I'm super chill to hang out and continue talking. If you need to go, many blessings for having been here. Thank you so, so much. Nicola, I'm tracking you and would love to know what you have to say.
Thank you. Wow. Do you
Oh,
hear me well?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. I can't speak high enough of like how much value I found in this 1 hour and everything that you've shared and all the reminders about really being connected to the body and learning how to read the trauma. I have a question that I want to ask. It's more of a practical standpoint, but I also want to say that, and it's actually related to my question. I also noticed, because I'm somebody very passionate about my own self-growth and healing and like really digging deep into the journey. And so learning how to feel these things myself and heal as I go. And I am so passionate about also, you know, mediating the conflict and being there for others as the guides, as to how to go through the trigger, right? How to get on the other side. And so I noticed that because I'm like first thing first, I really appreciate the authenticity, and I want to make sure that we all know that we are humans with, you know, learning. Nobody is higher, nobody is above anybody. We're all equal here and we're learning together. And when we acknowledge this, it happens that, you know, as you are facing somebody else's, let's say, conflict, you notice your own reaction to it, your own trauma response to it, right? And so my question comes when this happens, and because for me also trauma is related, it sits in the body and it's linked to emotion, and some sort of emotion comes through. And I see myself a very emotional person, and I can share the power and energy of my emotion very strongly, especially if I'm not aware of it. And I would like to know how to navigate, you know, when I notice my own trigger and there's a situation going on. What's the best outcome? Besides saying, hey, let's take a time out and take a deep breath together, and, you know, yeah. Thank you.
And there's so many nuances to that, right? Because we can imagine a situation where there's so many different identities at play, time constraints, power dynamics. I do want to put a little asterisk here. One, I believe that I saw that Aloysius wrote in that we're not post-colonialism by any means. Colonialism is definitely continuing to act. So I think in part, when we're having these conversations, is to realize that we're trying to create opportunities for connection and peace while violence is still happening. So it's a really challenging job. And you already pointed out an incredible tool that we have is to be able to bring the body into our conversation. To be able to be, I don't know, an example could be when you said that, I noticed my body got really hot. I noticed if I'm hot, I'm not going to be as present. I need to take a moment to be able to cool down. Or yo, I'm noticing my own fight response here. That means that something's up. Let's slow down and check it. What's your survival response that's going on right now? Can you name it? What's the pattern? So often our survival responses co-act with one another. My body's has a history of how to participate with somebody else's fight response. I also have a history of how to participate with somebody else's fawn response or their freeze response. And so they're not only noticing what my response is, but what's my relationship to somebody else's survival response? And can I validate it? Because that's what's kept them alive. But also, how do I keep myself safe enough and at a distance enough that I know that I can keep myself regulated? So it's all going to change based off of our positionalities, how they're swirling with one another, and how well resourced you are in the moment. So I don't want to give any assigning conclusions, except that in any relationship, your body is so important. Returning to that 85% body communication to your brain, you're only going to be able to perceive, communicate, talk. Oh, I forgot another percentage. Did I already say this? When you're in your survival response, you lose access to about 75 to 85% of your brain structures. It goes all back here. You lose all the stuff up here. So being able to pop in and out of them effectively keeps our brain on. To be able to do all the magnificent work that we all want to get up to.
Wow, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. There's also a really cool book called Conflict is Not Abuse. So particularly for those of us that have a very overt survivorship of abusive relational patterns, that is an incredibly helpful book. Conflict is Not Abuse. Because we're going to feel the same in conflict, even though it's not actually abusive. So there's a really interesting discerning line. All right, let's see, David and Ray, what you got?
David, do you want to go first? Okay, I'll go. Thanks, Morgan, for spending time with us and sharing space with us. It's been awesome. I have a point of curiosity. It's kind of building on something someone said around how things can feel foreign because we're so used to maybe being in spaces that are traumatizing. When we enter a space that is trauma sensitive and healing, it can be quite scary, and almost we have a response to kind of reject it. And I was wondering, as someone who's interested in how we create more healing trauma sensitive spaces, how we might recognize that and support folks in gently entering these types of new ways of being and interacting with human beings.
Such an exquisite question. So good. So two things. A, normalizing that. So like shifting from lack of safety to safety feels really fucking weird. It feels unsafe to go from lack of safety to safety. Your body's like, what is this? This is weird, because you've become so familiarized to patterns of violence. So A, like being really, really like normalizing of that. And also remembering trauma happens too much too fast. So you get to dose yourself at the like titrating level that you can around being around safe folks. For folks who are setting container and inviting folks in who might not have experienced safe enough relationships or trauma sensitive enough relationships, is to be really explicitly upfront about like how you're doing it, that it's not a mystery. We are creating an opportunity for the possibility of safety. Remember, like we can't assure safety because you never know if somebody's gonna feel safe or unsafe. You're creating the opportunity for like a brave space or a safe enough space to try on safety with each other, and really lay out what you're doing to be able to like be explicit, like this is how we're creating safety. Do you need anything else to make sure that this space is safe enough to you? There's no mystery to it. It's not like this like backdoor agenda of like, this is how we're creating safety, but you'll never know about it kind of bullshit. So yeah.
I also want to show the fact that we are engaging in practice sessions in the coming weeks of the Graviton training. So if you are a space convener, we're going to be putting in good shit that you can throw down on and get some experience with.
Mm-hmm. David, what you got?
Yeah, awesome. I was just really impressed by your presentation, and most of my question is around how to learn more. Like in the beginning, I thought it was great how you set the stage and like made like acknowledged different pains and things. You just did it really well, and I'm curious how I, as somebody who presents on topics at times, can be, maybe I wouldn't go every single step that you laid out in the beginning, but a lot of it was like really, I thought was really great. How can I get, and also just in general, where to learn more. Like I went to the training study plan and I grabbed those links. I put them in our Gravity Discord channel, and about the grandmother's hands. So I got those resources, but if there's anything else that you can share we can learn more, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm gonna hop into the chat here so that I can type out some folks to follow. And anybody else, like this is not just on me, right? Like I just got picked for today. We got a whole team representing. So anybody else that is, doing some deep practice around inclusion, accessibility, nonviolence, anti-colonialism, like toss in your resources. Some folks that I deeply admire.
Adrienne Marie Brown.
I got you. That's what I was just about to do.
Yeah.
So Adrienne Marie Brown is an incredible Black queer. Let's see if I can type and talk at the same time. Possibly not. Let me try. Okay, so she started the Emergent Strategy series, which is a series of books, as well as a training institute. So she is a queer Black doula, and I believe calls herself like a life doula. She's deeply committed to transformative and liberatory practices. And she's got incredible books like We Will Not Cancel Us, Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism. And this one for you, David, this is probably the most specific to your question, is Holding Change. It is a book that she wrote in co-authorship that talks about the procedural efforts that groups can go through to make sure they're checking themselves kind of at every layer to make sure they're creating space that is built around inclusion. And has different metrics in there for leaders to be able to be like, did I think of that? Oh shit, I didn't think of that. If I didn't think of that, then I might have caused harm. Okay, let me think about that as I'm designing the space. So that's a really helpful resource. Thinking about this on the fly, I will definitely be adding resources into the Discord channel. In regards to the body science stuff that I talked about, that is polyvagal theory. So this is a little controversial because, a white guy from the 70s that set up this theory, and also the explicitness to which we can understand the hardwiring of our body and what we are capable of, and what kind of supports we need to be able to stay present in our body. Polyvagal theory is incredibly helpful. Also mentioned as Menachem, I believe I spelled that right. Somatic abolitionism. So yeah, he brings polyvagal theory into studies around how to interrupt and then disentangle from white body supremacy as folks of color and as white folks, because it's all of our jobs. And that our bodies are the place and site of the work to be able to create abolitionist and liberatory systems. So he also has trainings. He also hasn't done his work around questioning misogyny and patriarchy really in his work. So that's a little questionable. He's got the race thing on point. So hold that, particularly folks who've been assigned female at birth or identify more as femme. It's a lot to navigate being in a relationship with him. Alrighty. Is there anything else? I'll probably in 2 hours have be like, I wish I would have said that. Oh, thank you, Jeremy. Yes, gabor mate. Yes.
Thanks so much.
We can't bypass our biology is really the base of all of this stuff. All of these authors are really deeply grounded in being able to be we cannot disconnect ourselves from Earth and we cannot disconnect ourselves from our body. And we have a limited but wildly expansive capacity, both at the same time. David, did you say something? I think I might have interrupted you.
Oh, I was just saying thanks for all the awesome resources. I copied all that over to our Discord channel. So I definitely will be reviewing this material later. So thank you.
Cool. And then I'm working with some incredible teams and folks up here in the Pacific Northwest and on the West Coast. We are in the middle of starting up an organization called Mycelial Movement Network. Alo and I are starting to kick off building an app of practices that allow for easy access to integration for all of the stuff that we talked about today. We're not totally up and running, but keep an eye out for that name. If you want to follow me on Instagram, which is kind of the platform I spend the most time on, if any, but you can get me there. And if you want to shoot me an email, might take me a little while to respond, but I swear I'll finally get to it. Nancy White doesn't ring a bell by name. What do they got, Jeremy?
She's an OG within the liberating structure scene, and I think you guys should fucking hang out. So
make it happen, Captain. I'm down.
That's what's up.
And very open to continue to connect with you all. I'm so grateful for being a part of Gravity. And there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we create liberatory structures within the Web3 space, because that too much too fast thing, whew, too much too fast.
Feel me? Thank you, Morgan. That was fire.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for your presence, for your time. Thanks Morgan for your facilitation. Yeah, it's too much too fast, but we also need to be just understanding that that's normal for all of us. And yeah, thank you, and hope to see you next week. Next week, David will be leading the session, and he will be talking about nonviolent communication. See you later. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye.
Chao, gracias a ustedes.
Ciao.